There we are. We're recording.
I know. I wish we'd recorded the conversation that we had 2 minutes ago about how much smaller I am than you.
Well, yeah, you do look at the screen and I look huge and you look tiny.
Yeah, but I am tiny. And that's when we did our hand comparison. And my hands are like a third smaller than yours. It's called real life, isn't it?
It is, exactly. That's it.
I think, truthfully, I don't realise how little I am until I either have somebody stood next to me, or I see somebody on the TV and I think they're really tiny, and then I look at their arms and I think my arms are smaller than that. I'm really tiny. In fact, I had that conversation with Dave last night watching something. Yeah, weird. Anyway, we thought we'd do some topics.
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk about the cost of living crisis, as it's so topical.
Current.
That's it. And also it's that time of the year where all the councils are talking about their council tax increases. And I was reading an article this morning about the fact that the government are allowing them to increase it. Normally they can do, I think it's 2.9%. This year they're allowing them to increase it to, I think it's 4.9%. As a maximum increase, mainly because of the adult social care bill.
Yeah.
So there are many councils that are announcing this week what their council tax rises are for the new financial year, and it's just more and more cost.
I hear that, but I think there's a value in paying your council tax, and I don't think a lot of people actually recognise the value in your council tax. Like you just said, social care. If we didn't have that, what would the impact be on the community, etc., etc., etc. It also pays for the police, etc., etc. You know, there's a lot of good things that come out of the council tax money. But I understand what you're saying about the impact that has on people. But is that also about we have had it incredibly comfortable for quite a number of years where the interest rates have been very low, and our wages have kind of paralleled that to a certain degree. Not everybody gets paid a massive wage. It's always been like that in this country, sadly. And is it that actually people aren't used to actually cutting their cloth accordingly?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. And so a couple of things. So the councils, a few years ago, they started doing those diagrams that showed you kind of what your council tax payment was, and then they would show kind of how many pennies and how many pounds would go to each service. And I thought that was a bit mind-blowing. It was really, really interesting. So I'm kind of hoping they start doing that again, because I think they kind of stopped, or certainly I've not seen it for a while. And I know HMRC did the same thing for your own tax. They would say, you paid however much tax this year, and this is kind of which budget it's gone to. And I found that really, really interesting. So I hope that continues. But yeah, in terms of the services we get, I think there's definitely value for money. It's just a shame that, everything is going up so much. And talking about the cost of living, we've got council tax increases, we've got mortgage and rents have gone up significantly since the start of the pandemic. And they're only going to get worse as a result of the Bank of England base rate increases. We've gone from a 0.25% up to 4%, potentially 4.5% by the end of March, is what the analysis is saying. We've then got council tax. We've then got gas and electric prices going up. And now we're going to the shops and we're paying a lot more money for our shopping. In fact, we're being limited on what we can buy because there's such a shortage. And it's just getting more and more crazy. And we're not seeing wages increase very much. I know a number of my friends have had small increases, 3%, 4%, 5%, but that's it.
Yeah, but 3 and 4, 5% increase in your wages is a significant amount of money for some people. And I also think realistically, I'm a business owner as well as everything else that I do. And fundamentally, some businesses can't afford anymore. And I think is it that we've just taken advantage of, I'm being quite controversial here and I don't want to offend anybody, but is it that we expect to get 6 packets of tomatoes from whichever supermarket we go into and for it to be available? Is it that we expect to be able to buy whatever we want whenever we want to? I came from a very, very poor background. my father was a gambler, so he gambled everything away at home, so we had nothing. And for one minute, do not want anybody to go through what I went through, and I don't want people to experience that. But there's so much more expectation put on employers as well as the government. And I think with COVID, it really hit a lot of companies really hard, and they are trying to play catch up so that they could continue to pay people and give them a wage.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're absolutely right. Is we forget that there are a lot of businesses that were forced to close. There are a lot of businesses that suffered significant losses because of the fact that they had to close or reduce customers or whatever. We've then got this massive increase in costs, and of course it's employers that a lot of the time are getting the blame, saying, well, they're not increasing wages. How can they when they've had such difficult few years? And it's really difficult. You look at the gas and electric prices, and it was only in the news the other week that a lot of the gas and electric suppliers have they've made record £1 billion profits. 17, 20 and more £1 billion of profits. Crazy. And that is crazy. Yeah. And you think, well, why are we not taxing them more?
But that doesn't that come back to greed? And there's an expectation. If you pay more, we're under the understanding that the reason why we're paying so much is because there's a shortage of gas and electricity.
Well, we're also being told that it's as a result of the Ukraine war, and that that we're having to buy gas and electric at a higher price. Rate. Well, if that's the case, why are these companies making record billion pound?
But
profits?
Is that partly because of the storage? Because if they store from the year before, then therefore they're buying it at a cheaper rate. They're charging us a higher rate, but by next year they're going to be paying it at the higher rate, which should balance out their profits.
That's a really good question. I don't know. I do remember reading a story about I think it was British Gas. I could be wrong. Whereby they basically looked after the national storage facility for gas for the whole of the UK or England, and they applied to close it because they felt there was no need for it, and they closed the facility down. And of course, the government are now thinking, oh, that was a bad decision. They're now paying them to reopen the facility so that they can store gas again, because supplies are so short. But I've seen on Twitter so many examples of comparisons between other EU countries, European countries, and other countries in the world of the average annual cost for gas and electric compared with the UK. And we are, in the realms of £1,500 to £2,000 per year more expensive than equivalent countries.
And I hear that, and I agree with you. And it feels not fair. It just feels not fair. But the other thing is, what do you do about it? You and I are powerless over doing anything about that. And it's like, how do you then rationalise your life to be able to then cope without allowing it to impact and take over? So, for example, I've never been a great person to put the heating on. I might put it on for an hour, if that. But some people have it on all the time. And it's like, sometimes it's like, it's not only just it's an environmental issue as well, because if you're burning gas and burning electricity all the time, then actually there's an impact on the environment. And is this making us a little bit more aware of that, as well as cutting our cloth?
I think there probably is an element of that. And there's lots of people as well that kind of get into routines. They routinely have their heating at, 21 degrees from, 5 p.m. till when they go to bed.
Yeah.
Well, turning it down 1 degree, okay, it might feel a little bit colder for, the first couple of days. But after that, you'll kind of get used to it. And there's a big cost saving there. I know Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, he was using that as an example of that's a really good way to save a lot of money.
Yeah. Simply
1 or 2 degrees of your heating, bringing it down,
or not turning it on at 5 o'clock and having it on till 11 o'clock at night.
Well, exactly that, yeah. And also, there's lots of people I'm aware of who they like to walk around their house in a t-shirt and shorts and have the heating on. I'm not one of those people, but I'm aware of lots of people that do that. And you think, well, have you got money to burn? Is that the right thing to do?
And I'm one of the coldest people in the world, and you know that. I mean, everybody dreads me coming to their house because I'm always damn cold. And you know, I just have a weird body. And so I appreciate that people want to be warm, but I also appreciate that, like, I'm sat here in a cashmere jumper and a t-shirt and a bra and various other bits. I'm wrapped up. I've got good socks on. You know, I'm pretty insulated because I don't want to get cold.
Yeah.
And I protect myself from the cold at every level. So if I've got to put another jumper on or another layer underneath my jumper, I do.
Yeah.
You know, and I suppose you've got to help yourself. There's an expectation that your employer or the government or the local food bank are going to help you out. And yes, they do an amazing job. And we just got some figures through this morning about how much, I think the local food bank in Burnham have helped another 250 people on top of what they did last year, this time last year.
That's figures. A huge number.
It is a huge number. But is that because people can't afford, haven't cut their cloth, or there's an expectation that somebody else is going to provide them with their dinner?
Yeah, and I hear that, and I think, you know, there are plenty of examples out there of people who, you know, they prefer to have the latest designer clothes or shoes or whatever. They prefer to, you know, smoke cigarettes than buy food, and they're the ones that I think, you know, really need to relook at their life and what really matters. You know,
but that's quite controversial, Mike, because
if
you turn around and say to somebody, you need to stop smoking, or you can't have the latest phone, or you can't have this, or you can't have that, immediately that big thing goes, oh, you're taking away my civil rights.
Yeah, and it is a bit controversial, but it's about cutting the cloth to what you can afford. And that's the thing here is, you know, you kind of can't be two-faced about this. You can't on one hand have the latest trainers and then not be able to afford food
to feed
or
your
to
kids.
provide for your kids.
Yeah.
You know, what's more important? And everyone has to make their own decision. And yeah, I think that's the thing. People just need to really think about what they're spending their money on.
And so, is it a crisis, or is it actually a reboot?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not sure is the answer. I don't think it's a reboot, but it could be a reboot. I think the issue we've got here is that it's all happened so quickly. You know, the gas and electric has gone up by, I think it's 237%. You know, as a percentage, that's a really scary number.
Yeah.
That's happened over almost I think it's 9 months now.
But the government have given everybody all this money back.
They have given us money back.
And it's got to be paid back in some way as well.
April is when the price cap goes up again. This temporary price cap goes back up. Is when this 67 odd pounds or whatever it is stops. We stop receiving that as a discount on our bills. So April, it's going to be a sharp shock again. Okay, we're not going to hopefully use as much gas because we're coming into spring and summer. But still, it's a very sharp rise. Likewise, you know, council tax, 4.9% is my local authority's increase. That again, it's quite significant.
Yeah.
As an increase, and then you've got Bank of England base rate going up, rents going up. You know, I'm a landlord. I've got a rental properties, and you know, just this morning I was looking at what our increases have been over the last 6 months, and it's significant.
I don't know.
You know, just our cost have gone up by about 12%.
Yeah.
Now, am I going to go and pass that 12% on to tenants? Well, no, I can't really do that. That's a massive increase for them. However, it is a real cost to us.
But I hear that, but it's like, if you look at as a business, I mean, we're in the same boat. You know, I look at the mortgage increases, and then I look at what money we're getting in as a rental, and we house a lot of incredibly vulnerable people that in other services would be charging £200-300 a week, and we don't.
Well, I think the other issue you've got there is, you know, your costs may have gone up. Maybe they're similar to mine, gone up by about 10 to 12%. Well, the housing benefit, which I know a lot of your tenants benefit from, you know, That's not gone up by
Oh,
10
no,
to
no.
12%.
No, it hasn't.
So where are they supposed to find
Exactly.
that money?
Exactly.
And I think for me, it's, well, what are we doing? What do we do?
But also, there comes a point where you actually start thinking, as somebody that provides housing for vulnerable people, you have to start questioning about, the taxman's going to question us when we lose money.
Yeah, for sure.
So, when our tax return goes in and you think, oh, hold on a minute, their profits have come down quite significantly. What's going on? Blah, 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 blah. And then they start questioning it. And then you're in that whole cycle.
Yeah.
And then they've put corporation tax up to, is it 25% next year?
Yeah, 25%.
It's come from 12.5% to 25%.
No, 19 to 25%.
It's 19 to 25%, which is a significant hike for a company.
It is.
And then
I don't know if you've had many insurance renewals recently, but I've had a few
we've
recently.
yeah.
And they've gone up. It's gone up by 20%.
Yeah.
The argument is that there's a reduction, or there's less repair people available to do repairs, so therefore the insurance company's charging a higher premium. I don't fully understand that logic. That doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, that's a 20% increase. All of these increases are significant. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5%. We're talking 20%. Gas and electric, 230%. Yeah. I can't do the maths quick enough, but Bank of England base rate from 0.25 to 4% as a percentage, that is a massive increase.
And I hear that, and it's like coming back to what your point was around rentals, and you can't offset it against the tenant. The tenant can't then afford to necessarily cover those costs that you're having to pay. Where does that money come from? Because nobody, I don't know about you, but I kind of look back and I reflect and I think, well, nobody's bailing us out. Does that make sense?
Well, if we were a bank and we were losing 100 billion this year, well, of course we get bailed out by the government.
Yeah, but that's your cynicism, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is, but that's the reality. Whereas we're relatively small companies in the grand scheme of things. That if we're struggling because of all these increasing costs, there's no handout coming. It's not going to happen.
Oh, I agree with you, and it's a bit like COVID. I mean, there was no handouts for small businesses like us.
No, there was. You could
have a loan.
Yeah, well, you can borrow this money at a small interest rate, and you can pay it back over 5 years. Yeah. That's all well and good, but again, you go and look at some of these big companies that were given a lot. Yeah. I remember they did the scheme. I forgot what it was called, but it was like an employer scheme whereby if you employ people of a certain age, and you'd basically get a discount on tax and things like that. And it was a clever scheme, but you had to employ something like 25 of these people. Well, who does that benefit? It benefits the biggest employers out there, the ones that have massive reserves, the ones that have got massive income, turnover, all of that kind of stuff. And whilst I'm not blaming them for that, they deserve all the success. The government always do very little for small businesses.
And interestingly, we applied for there's a small business. There was a thing that our local council were doing about small businesses, and we applied. It was about environment changes, about things that you're doing to improve the environment and stuff like that. And we applied for it. And actually, about some of the lighting that we've changed and some of the other bits and pieces. And they said, oh, you can't have this because it's ongoing work. And it's like, well, it's not. We've completed that. We've told you we've completed that. And the rest of the stuff we will do when we can afford it. At this moment in time, actually, we can't afford it, so we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But it's not that we've not completed that one thing that we've applied for.
Yes.
So, and I was like, this is really odd. What's that about? But coming back to that, is like in COVID, we were open 24 hours a day, 52 weeks of the year. Always have to be. And but we didn't get any money to support our staff who were pretty stressed about the whole situation. They were having a pretty rough time.
Yeah.
And yet other employers could keep their employees on, got a certain amount of money coming in. They didn't have to continue to run their companies. They didn't have to do all of that, didn't they? And I think sometimes, and I know that people got that money that weren't entitled to that.
Yeah.
And there's
Well,
no accountability.
I know a number of companies who are paying staff effectively the furlough rate, the 80%, but the staff are working full time.
Yeah.
And you think, well, how does that work? And there's two ways of looking at that. You could look at it and say, well, they were working and they were doing that in order to ensure that they had a job to go back to.
Yeah.
That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, well, that business, they took advantage of a scheme.
It's dishonest.
It's a bit dishonest. Well, it is dishonest. No matter which way you look at it, it's dishonest. But yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? How different organisations are treated differently.
Yeah.
It should be blanket, although if it was a blanket policy, I'm sure we'd find a way of complaining about that. But
yeah, I'm sure. Does it come back to though that part about when you're talking is it a crisis or is this is where it is today? I think the media have so hyped it up. I went and did an interview for BBC Somerset the other day, and it came up there, and I'm thinking, I hear what you're saying, but is it really, really necessary to go, we're in this crisis? Because actually, I think if the BBC, the ITV News and everybody else in the world didn't say that, I don't think people would approach it like that.
Well, it's a bit like the country being in a recession.
Yeah.
Are we in a recession or are we not in a recession? Because you listen to the media and the media will tell you that we are on the brink of or we are in a recession. Well, I think it was the IMF came out and said, actually, we're not in a recession.
Yes, that's right.
We avoided a recession.
Yeah.
But
also we had more tax coming in this country than we did outgoings. I think it was last month or the month before. I can't remember which month it was. So there was more money in tax paid than the government had to pay out.
Which is incredible.
Which is amazing because that's saying that people have got off their rusty dusties and gone back to work.
Yeah, yeah. But I think the media have got a lot to answer for. And, I enjoy listening to the news. I enjoy reading the news. However, I also wonder what life would be if you didn't listen to it, because has anything really changed in the last 6 months? Yes, things have got more expensive. Yes, things have become, pockets have been tighter and so on. But I don't think the world would be as bad or as scary if you hadn't listened to the media. Well,
okay, I bought a bag of carrots for 50p on my Tesco's delivery.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I look at that bag of carrots. Now for me to make a bag of carrots, I have to get the seeds. They're probably £1.50. I have to get potting compost.
Yeah.
Say a £5 just to be polite. Then I have to plant them, my time. I then have to find them the seeds got to come up. Then I've got to do this. Then I've got to dig it up, repot, all of that.
Prevent all the animals eating them.
Yeah. And you could probably guarantee, if it was my luck, because I'm rubbish with seeds, that I'd probably end up with 2 carrots.
Yeah.
And yet I can go to Tesco's or whoever I shop with, Aldi, whatever, and get them for 50p. Now, we're not living in the real world if we think we can get a bag of carrots for 50p. I was really shocked. I don't feel that we pay enough for food, and so therefore it pushes other people into a crisis. For example, farmers, they don't want to, it's almost not it's not an advantage for them to actually grow food.
Well, and I think this is it, is that we've had it so good for so long. The like you said, carrots as an example are very cheap, really. Like you said, 50p,
yeah.
It would cost you a lot more to grow them at home. And if you compare that with other things like rent and mortgages, is probably the best example I can give. An interest rate of 1-2% is kind of unheard of. If you averaged it out over the last 100 years, the last 10, 15 years have been a massive drop to what the norm is.
Yeah.
The norm is about 4.5%, which is where we're at the moment.
Yeah.
What it feels like right now is it just feels a bit scary because it's unusual.
Yeah.
So
we've paid 15% on our mortgage. And Dave and I have gone, oh my word, how are we going to do this? And actually it's, do you know what? We'll do it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
You'll make it work.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what's going to happen. I think we'll have to see where it goes. I think when the government announced the new financial budget, which I think is in a couple of weeks' time, we'll see what happens.
6, yeah.
Yeah, obviously the challenge we've got is all the things that are outside the government's control, such as Bank of England base rate is out of the government's control, gas and electric prices out of the government's control. So there's food even, it's out of the government's control. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
And I agree with you, but let's just look at it in a different aspect, which is how do you change your attitude towards it mentally? Because the impact that has on people mentally when you're being bombarded by media and in the playground or at work or, your friends around the dinner table, etc., etc. How do you cope with that?
Yeah.
That psychological impact and the fear that is generated, that actually you're not going to be able to afford to put your heating on.
Yes.
You're not going to be able to afford to feed your children. You're not going to be able to afford to clothe your children. The list goes on, doesn't it?
It does. That's it. And I think there's loads of resources out there that are really helpful guides on how to, keep your costs a bit lower. I read an article, I saw it on Twitter a few weeks ago, and it was a lady who's a chef who has basically written, I think it's 10 or 15 recipes that she makes for her family of 4 for less than £5.
Yeah.
And it's a really good resource. And I think what we can do is in the description of the podcast, we can put some links to some resources that people can have a look at. But I've cooked a couple of the recipes and they are really good.
Yeah, yeah.
And you sort of think, well, how on earth is it this cheap? Yeah. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
And I think that's another thing. It's a little bit like waste, isn't it? If you look at the amount of food that's wasted, people buy things, it's got a best before date. A best before date doesn't mean to say you've got to throw it away.
No, it's a guide.
That's a guide. And there's some things that obviously when they've got green mould on, you can't eat them.
Yeah.
And other things that if you've got...
Unless it's cheese.
I cut it off, if I'm honest. But it's things like that you've got to think, well, hold on a minute. When I was a kid, and it's way before your time, but when I was a kid, we didn't have best before dates. We didn't have all the other dates. And
well, there's quite a few shops now that are removing best before dates, which I think is a really good idea because, people need to. Yeah,
but there's then the other party that go, what about listeria in this and that, and you think, well, that listeria didn't really happen when I was a kid, so.
It's because you didn't know about it.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't all over social media. But you're right. There's so many people out there. I mean, I can feed people really cheaply. Get a bag of beans and a bag of lentils and stick a few onions and a bit of chilli in there, and it tastes wonderful, as you know, on Tuesday night. And you can cook cheap meals. And if you don't know, like you said, this lady's done a fantastic job of showing you. But the other thing, what about those people that don't have links to the internet? So what do they do? Because
I think that's a really good example actually of where our coffee and chats come in.
Yeah.
Because we hold our coffee and chats in the various villages around, and people come along, they have a cup of tea, they meet people, they have a slice of cake, and they chat and share knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think it's going back to those kind of olden times, I suppose, of you talk with your neighbours, you talk in your community, you share ideas, and that's where people can benefit from local knowledge. But also, it's about creating that community cohesion, whereby if there is somebody in your community who might be struggling a little bit, and you can help them out, whether that's giving them a bag of potatoes or whether that's inviting them to dinner or a coffee or whatever. I think that's where to go and help out.
And I agree with you, because I think our neighbourhoods have kind of broken down slightly, partly because people's lack of people work hard, long hours.
Yeah.
people are quite judgmental. I think that's based on media and various other bits. Oh, they're not working, you know, And it's like, actually, they may not be working because they may have a serious illness that you know nothing about.
Well, that's right, and they can't work for whatever reason it might be.
Mental illness does not present itself with a Band-Aid on your arm. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not.
Well, there's loads of illnesses and disabilities that don't.
But that's what I'm saying. You know, I suppose it's the hidden disabilities, as they call it, isn't it? But that's always been there. That has always been there.
Of course it has.
There's always been the person that couldn't work.
Yeah, and we're so much more aware of it now because of the media and everything. So, yeah, the media is good and bad. I mean, us doing this, we're technically part of the media now, so...
Oh, are we?
You know.
Oh, dear. You didn't tell me that
we might get tarred with the same brush, who knows?
Well, I think we will be to a certain degree. Somebody's always got an opinion, and I think there's nothing wrong with having an opinion.
No,
it's
I agree.
just as long as you share it in a respectful manner. And going back to the coffee and chats, I think it's a really good point about them, because it is bringing people together. I think we're going to start a new one, aren't we? Probably going to do a soup and chat, coffee and stuff, rather than doing a coffee and chat in one place. I think in Cheddar, I think it is, because it's just not been as successful as we'd like to have been, if you see what I'm saying. But I think the one that we do in Burnham is fabulous. I mean, it's brilliant.
I think what's really good is that every time I go there, it's just grown. Yeah. And it's really nice as well now that we've got some nice companies locally that are sponsoring it.
Yeah.
Which is, it just means we can reach more people, and support more people, and the community are effectively supporting us back, which is fantastic.
But it's taken a long time, hasn't it? That has taken a long time for that to happen. And I think it's quite sad, really, that it's taken so long, but also very grateful for those companies that have supported it. I think sometimes we just need to give them a bit more recognition. But I know we talked about that at our last trustees meeting. Yeah. But and I suppose as we are quite a middle class set of charity in a trustees capacity. Do you know? We all work. We are all capable of working. We all have a reason. Well, except for one person who's retired, but. You know, we're all quite very fortunate people. So most of us don't struggle in any way financially, but some of us have in the past. And I think that's why we've got a level of empathy with. I
think you're right. And I think also because we're in perhaps a fortunate position, it means that we can give our time to help, you know, to realise what's going on in our communities and help other people. And I think that's what's quite rewarding, that we can go and do that. And
I think our figures, like our face-to-face and counselling figures, I think, are up to 145 a week.
And I think that is just incredible. I mean, when I became a trustee, however many years ago it was now, I think 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, I'm not sure. But it's been a while. You know, when I first joined the board, you know, we were seeing between 60 and 80 people.
Correct. And thought that was big.
And I think... I always have a little chuckle to myself whenever we have a trustee meeting, and you and another trustee always says, we don't want the charity to get any bigger. And I think, do you realise what's happened over the last few years? It has got bigger. And
it scares me.
Don't be scared, because I think the reality is that the charity, as it gets bigger, I think it'll become a bit more self-sustaining.
I hear you, but it does scare me. I think the reason it scares me is a little bit like people in the crisis, is because what I don't want to do, and I know we've got money to one side to manage that as part of our budget, but I don't want all of a sudden for us to have no funding and we end up letting a lot of people down, those 145 people. And I mean, I know I'd end up paying for it myself, and you would too, and so would the other trustees. We put our hands in our pockets, but you can only do that for so long. We have to be self-sustaining, like you said. It's got to sustain itself. I completely agree, and I think because the charity has got bigger and has grown more roots, maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. It's got better roots. It's become a lot more respected and well known by some of the larger organisations in the area. You know, using Hinkley Point as an example, you know, they're a supporter of ours. You've got businesses locally that again have supported. So I think the fear of that is reducing at the same time. If you plotted it on a graph, I think you'd see growth, and I think you'd see support pretty much in line with each other. Yeah, I agree with you.
So, and obviously the community and residents locally, I think also, you know, they they support it by coming along to coffee and chats. By, you know, I think it was either last year or the year before, we had somebody contact us on Facebook, kind of out of the blue, never spoken to them before, and they said, you know, we're going to go and do I think it was a walk or a run, and we're doing it for your charity. And I've got goosebumps just saying that, actually.
I got goosebumps too.
Because you think, you know, that's incredible that someone is going to do that. They've never used our services, as far as I'm aware. Maybe they know someone who has or has wanted to use us, and they've gone and raised this. They've gone and done this challenge. They've raised this money, and it was a significant amount of money, and it was just incredible.
But isn't that the same with the place in Breen? Was it that the dance company that do the pole dancing exercise classes and things like that?
They held that event.
I couldn't believe that. And Mandy and Aaron went along, didn't they? They had a ball. They really enjoyed themselves. But it's like, wow, that is so things like that is just so kind. I mean, it's just like,
it's incredible. And I think that, you know, like I said, as the charity grows roots, I'm going to use, you know, I think that will happen more and more, and it's fantastic. And I hope that it does grow. I hope that it gets more support, because I think it just evidences that, you know, when you founded the charity, how many years ago now? Is it about 14 years?
No, it's 12.
12 years ago. You know, you started off as an acorn, and, you know, it's growing into a tree now.
I know.
And I think it's really nice. And I wonder if it's almost like, you know, a child going off to school type thing, whether that's part of the fear that it's going
no,
off.
not at all. I think the fear for me, the only anxiety I have is about it being, is not getting that funding. Is not getting that.
Like you said, letting people down.
Yeah, and I don't want to let anybody down. I feel quite strongly about that. I know the importance of having, when you have counselling and you have support, that if it's taken away from you very suddenly, it's a real shock.
Yeah.
And we've obviously situations like that have occurred within the charity where somebody's left, a counsellor's left, or whatever circumstances, or been unwell, and you think, that is quite, I mean, it's a lot of work for us to kind of condense that and manage that. But I just feel overly responsible, I suppose, in that sense.
No, and I get that. I do understand that.
What happens when I die?
We'll keep monitoring it.
When do I retire from the charity? That's another thing. I've got to think about that one, don't I?
Well, I think it's about getting the charity to a point where it's as stable as it can be, that you're allowed to go and retire.
Okay, thanks.
But we'll see. But I think, you know, as the cost of living crisis, I'm going to use that framework, as that unfortunately gets worse, and sadly I think it's going to get worse over the next 12 months. Yeah, I think it will. I think there's going to be bigger demand for the charity. I think there's going to be more people that need it. I remember the conversation we had with Dan Milford, the principal of King Alfred School. You know, he was saying that he's concerned about the next 12 months. He thinks it's going to... His young people, his students at the school, and the families and community around the school are going to need more support. And I think he's right, and I think the charity's probably going to see demand and referrals increase. And I think, you know, I just hope that the organisations around us are able to support the charity in doing what it can to support people.
Yeah, and I see that, and I think sometimes perhaps the charity's position is, or the community's position towards the charity, I should say, has changed, because people now see it as, it's almost validated, if you see what I'm saying. And I think because of that, and word of mouth, and we don't always get good press. It's called life. That is life. You know, we're not perfect.
No,
we do our best, and that's all we can do. We can't do anything more. But I do feel that people then don't feel that it's less scary to approach.
Yeah.
Whereas before, I think it was the unknown for a lot of people, but because we're out there a bit more and we're doing this to kind of let people know about what we're doing, it's a bit like asking for help a bit quicker instead of letting things get out of hand.
It is.
And I would say that people are more inclined to do that than they were before. Exactly the same as people will go to because we can get people vouchers for the food bank, for example. We have that access, and so therefore people will come to us and ask us for that, if we can help them with that, on top of, and actually I need to talk to you about this,
Yeah.
So that's all that, and the councillors are all aware of that, and I think it's a really nice opportunity.
I think it's really nice because it means actually we're hopefully able to help people with more than one issue.
Yeah.
Or more than
Oh,
one
definitely.
difficulty.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's become a bit more of a one-stop shop. That's not necessarily a good thing. You know, we don't want to see people with multiple difficulties or challenges, but it's nice that we're able to do that. And of course, we can always signpost people as well,
which we do. We do that too. And I think that, you know, coming back to finance, there's lots of small groups, and it's not just the Citizens Advice Bureau that are around that help people with their finances now. And I think that's been really good, because I think a lot of people became very dependent on the Citizens Advice Bureau. They then cut their cloth and stopped being, like we had a situation where they were supposed to be there in a certain place and they didn't turn up the other day. And I think having a broader options for financial support and guidance, particularly people with debts, I think that's helped enormously, absolutely enormously. And I think the government kind of stepped in for that one, because actually I think they recognise that we can't help everybody.
No, exactly, that's it.
And CAB can't do all of the finance stuff.
No, that's right. And it is about that kind of joint partnership working and all of that kind of stuff, which I think, again, as the charity grows, I think it will get more roots, and I think it will get more connections to be able to kind of do some of that stuff, which would be really good. So, brilliant. Should we end it there?
Yep. I'm happy if you're happy.
I am. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.